Morning and welcome to our session today. So our session today is part of the leadership and innovation stream, and we'll focus on innovations in governance and strategy. So I'm gathering from the level of energy that came in the room that the ice cream worked a treat. So well done, that was fantastic. Derek and I were just commenting that often in governance sessions, you might have, a few people. So it's just wonderful to see a full house here, and I didn't have to get any of my family members to come in and take up some seats. So, so thank you. So my name is Meredith Blais, and I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for Volunteering Western Australia. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to your participation. So this is a panel session, so we'll have lots of opportunities to ask questions, and we'll also have presentations from the panel. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I understand that they have had continuous enjoyment of this land for the last 20,000 years, and it really is beautiful country. So I hope people get a chance that are visiting from interstate to come and have a look around. So today's session, as I said, is a panel discussion which will explore the vital role that volunteer board members play in ensuring effective governance, how leadership and strategic insights are vital to innovation, and raise awareness on issues of insurance and risk management. So when we think about not-for-profit governance, we of course think about volunteer boards. And the National Strategy for Volunteering, which was of course released just yesterday, identified that volunteer board members are actually one of the most common forms of volunteering in the sector. So when you think that there are something like at least 400,000 not-for-profits, we definitely know that there's 60,000 volunteer boards. There's an enormous number of people across Australia that are actually volunteering in volunteer board capacities. And it's a good time to reflect on the fact of what is that experience like for that board member? Is it what they expected? Are they being able to bring their talents and their contribution to the role? How do they interface with the operations of the organisation without taking over and stepping into that space? And really, I think one of the things that we find is that in some areas, volunteer board members, like everything else, are getting burnt out. They're often on multiple boards. So it's really about how do we get that new generation of volunteer board members, and how do we make that a rewarding experience for them. And our speakers will touch on those issues, both in research terms and in practical terms today. So as I said, I'll introduce the panellists. They'll provide a brief introductory remarks, and there will be ample time for panel discussion. So we'll launch in now to our first panellist. So our first presenter is Derek Turner, who is the client director, not-for-profit for Aon Insurance Company. So some of you may recognise Derek. He's been hanging around the exhibition hall, and if you have detailed questions or anything about insurance that you want to ask afterwards, you can find him in the exhibition hall for the balance of the presentation. So Derek is a client manager with a not-for-profit team in Aon, where he specialises in the management of association partners and peak bodies, including the onboarding of new not-for-profit clients and the development of educational materials. Responsibilities include assisting in the management of the not-for-profit team through in-depth policy reviews, day-to-day account management, and introducing large clients and placement of insurance programs. So please join me in welcoming Derek to the stage.
I've never been applauded like that before. Thank you. Thank you, Meredith. Good morning, everyone. Look, I know it's been said a lot the last couple of days, but it really is great to be at this conference in person for the first time in 4 years. It's definitely been a long time coming. I unfortunately didn't make it to the drinks last night, but I heard there was a bit of a vibe, and some people like Brad got kicked out at the end of the night, so must have been a really good night. As Meredith mentioned, my name is Derek. I'm the client manager with the not-for-profit team at Aon. Just as a bit of background, Aon's been an insurance broker in Australia since about the 1940s. We're the only broker in Australia with a dedicated not-for-profit team, and we've been partnered with Volunteering Australia for about 35 years. So we have a really great relationship there too. Insurance isn't the most exciting part of this presentation. It's definitely not the most exciting part of the conference. I'm very well aware of that, but what we're going to try and do is make, put a little bit of a spin on insurance, how you actually think about it, and some of the secondary benefits it might have to the organisation that you might not be seeing. Just quickly, as required by law, I am just required to let you know this is all general advice. I haven't taken into account anyone's personal information, circumstances, finances. If you do want a bit more of a personal conversation, please come see us at the booth. You can get contact details and we can go from there. All right, so something that we're seeing through research, forums such as this, speaking with Volunteering Australia, dealing with clients every day, is there's still a lot of lack of confidence for volunteers coming back into the workforce, particularly post-COVID as well. So what we need to look at potentially some strategies to actually bring volunteers back into that workforce. The first one we are looking at there is, do volunteers actually feel protected? Do they feel comfortable with coming back into the workforce? And we can look at this with sort of two pillars through insurances. The first one is simply reviewing your policies that you have in place, speaking with your brokers to make sure that they're extending to the activities that you're doing, as well as extending to the people that you actually work with. But the secondary benefit from that, which I think a lot of people don't really consider, is using it as a marketing tool. So when you are actually advertising volunteers, seeking for help, we don't see enough where people actually note down what kind of insurances they have in place so that when people do come to work for you, they feel protected. It's something that sort of falls by the wayside and it's not utilised enough. I think that's a secondary benefit to insurance that can actually be used in advertising or seeking for volunteers as well. Extending that a little bit further, it can actually help you bring in a greater caliber of volunteer as well. As an example, when you're looking around for new executives, committee members, directors, advertising the insurances you have in place and what it extends to can actually bring in a greater caliber of applicant for you. Your committee members, your directors, they deal with a lot of governance issues, legislative requirements, contractual issues. And the last thing that they want to be worrying about is, are they actually covered for the decisions they make? Or if something happens, will they have to dip into their personal assets to be able to cover themselves? It's the last thing that anyone wants, especially when they're volunteering their time to be able to assist that organisation too. You take that away from the people aspect as well and look at how you can actually expand your activities. At the booth yesterday, so many people came up to us asking, can we provide cover for these activities? Or do you do this? Can you do that? And it's clear that there's so many organisations out there are wanting to do more, but they're just being hindered. They're being limited by the insurances that they've got. There's no one broker for anything, so it's important to sit there and shop around, speak with other brokers, because one, by expanding the activities that you want to do, simply by changing your insurances, that changes how you service your community. That can actually bring in new volunteers who, want to assist the community in the way that you've found a way to do it. But it can also bring in new volunteers as well, because you might be doing something different to what everyone else in the community is doing as well. Risk management, there is still a lot of misconception around how this actually works. There is a misconception that insurance is risk management. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It always just forms one component of it. And usually insurance is the last component to respond. If you look at your insurances, you'll see a bunch of exclusions of what the policy doesn't actually cover. So it's really important to look at the balance between your risk management procedures and the insurances that you have in place as well. So risk management, it's a recognised method of injury prevention. It's something that insurers are looking at a lot more seriously now. In the last 24 months, there's been an increase of claims in the community sector, unfortunately. So when you are putting applications in for insurances, you will be asked for copies of your risk management plans and procedures, because insurers are wanting to see the policies you have in place to reduce the risk of claims. They go hand in hand, unfortunately, now. You need to look at that beyond your physical assets. So beyond insuring your contents, beyond insuring your volunteers, beyond insuring the public that you deal with. We only need to look at what happened last year with Optus and Medibank around how serious data breaches are now and how serious cybercrime is. And a lot of not-for-profits still look at it now and think, we're so small, we don't hold any sort of important information, why would they attack us? But the information stolen from Optus and Medibank, it was contact names, email addresses and phone numbers. And that's something that 9 out of 10 not-for-profits hold. So just because the information you hold may not be, may not feel like it's important for someone else that's stealing it, you don't know what they're using it for. So it is really important to make sure that you're reviewing those systems as well, looking at staff training, making sure you're not clicking on links that say, Christmas sales are happening in June, and make sure everyone is actually trained up on how to prevent data breaches as well. Risk management, as always, it should be specific to your organisation. It should never be copied from somebody else. A group that does childcare is very different to one that does gardening services. So it's really important to look at your activities, look at what could potentially occur and what measures and policies you put in place around that to prevent anything from happening. If all else fails then that's what you're looking for the insurance to pick up, but you want to try and nip that in the bud before anything happens as well. And just quickly, this is just a snapshot of common insurances available for not-for-profits. It's definitely not exhaustive. A lot of these you'll probably have already. Some of them you might have looked at before and not really known what it's used for. You might not be able to have a great understanding of what it's actually there to cover. Come see us at the booth, get our contact details. We can have a chat, let you know a bit more information about why they're actually beneficial to you, and how they can actually be used to not only protect your organisation, but also how we can actually use those to bring volunteers back into the workforce for you as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Derek. It's actually really interesting to think about the new areas of insurance. We get a lot of questions at Volunteering WA about things like privacy, health safety, cybersecurity. So there's new risks, I guess, or new risks rising in importance. So it's a good opportunity for us to ask questions about that later. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We have Brad Cooper, who is the CEO of Volunteering Gold Coast. Brad has worked for not-for-profit organisations for the majority of his working life. He has over 15 years of experience in senior operational and executive roles in human services organisations across Victoria, Tasmania and Queensland. Brad began his career as a nurse. I love the backgrounds. I love learning about the journeys that people in the volunteering sector have undertaken. They're always so diverse, so much more to them than perhaps the current role they hold. So Brad worked as a nurse, moving from hospitals into tertiary education and research, then moved into community aged care, homelessness services and mental health services. His focus is on outcomes and impact for service users and employees, drawing on the collective wisdom and insights across an organisation. So that really goes to the strategy and the strategy development within an organisation. I think he's looking pretty good for someone who was partying a little over 12 hours ago. So Brad has held volunteer roles as a board member and project roles developing professional practice standards. Please join me in welcoming Brad.
I swear I got to bed at a good time. There wasn't a problem. Thank you so much for the welcome. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. It's interesting meeting the panel members in person for the first time. It didn't dawn on me last week when we had a briefing that Derek may have associated my name with one of the greatest insurance frauds and collapse in Australian history, which was the Rodney Adler, Brad Cooper, HIH piece for those of you who remember. Normally the name garners a whole heap of disappointment amongst people who think I might be the other Bradley Cooper. And the joke I often like to say is world's sexiest man 2011, but the last decade has been very unkind. So don't judge me. We're going to have a bit of a chat about governance today. I guess what I'd like to start off with is a bit of a show of hands. Can you pop your hand up? And if you're online, could you do this electronically? Could you put a show of hands up if you are currently a board member, volunteer board member for an organisation in the room? Okay, so maybe about a quarter to a fifth of the room. Can you leave your hand up? Let's start dropping them down. If you've got only 1 year's experience, pull your hand down. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, 13 years, 14 years, 15 years. I'm going to stop there at 15 years. So rather than kind of emulating an auction, it kind of shows You know, there are a core group of people who are carrying the load for governance in some organisations, and I think that's part of the theme and the alert that Volunteering Australia has tried to bring us to, and the purpose of this conversation. I want to thank you for your service. That's probably the first thing. Our board, our organisation, our communities in particular, as a volunteer resource centre, we welcome the funding announcement yesterday that came through from Minister Rishworth. And if you've been governing on a volunteer resource centre over the last decade, particularly over the last 5 years, then you've governed through some really very interesting times. Just a little bit about Volunteering Gold Coast. So we exist to deliver our experience through leadership and volunteer management, advocacy and targeted activities for members of the community in need. And our purpose is really important. Our activity as a volunteer resource centre constitutes about 2.5% of our revenue. And it probably represents 95% of our identity, right? In terms of services, we're now in our 25th year. And we always acknowledge our founder, Peter Mark, who drew on his experience of working in the hack space back in that time to see the potential of individuals and communities to come together through volunteering to increase the impact and improve the lives and well-being of vulnerable members of the community. In many ways, it's very much like the contemporary VMA policy today in those aims. We've got a volunteer board, and our executive, we've been really innovative. We've been seeing serving a number of communities that have been aligned to our Volunteering Gold Coast brand, and also through a sub-brand that we own, Volunteering Services Australia, which sees us to continue to operate and provide services outside of the Gold Coast, in particularly Volunteer Resource Centre services for the city of Ipswich. And previously we'd actually operated this brand in Launceston, responding to a community call for support from, I guess, an organisation that was seen to be able to meet that local need. And that's been a bit of a challenging time, I guess, for the board to work through, and maybe in terms of some of the relationships that we've had with the peaks. So it's challenged what those sort of ideas of traditional markets were. The Gold Coast itself, we're the 6th largest city in the country, 630,000 people. If you add the Tweed, the border was quite a real thing through COVID, but if you add the Tweed into that, you add another 100,000 people. And I think if you think of the magnitude of what we do, if we change the lens of what our scope could be, if we thought about population rather than state borders, Tasmania has a peak organisation for volunteering for 541,000. Here in the ACT, it's only 454,000. So we are a powerhouse as the 6th largest cities, and we sit in a structure where that's not necessarily always recognised, but the size and scale is important. Last year, we celebrated the recruitment of our 50,000th volunteer for the Gold Coast community. It's a massive feat, and we estimate that over that journey, we've contributed something like $112 million worth of economic impact for the city of Gold Coast, or the Gold Coast community. If you use minimum wage, you can double that if you use Volunteering WA's measure, which is about almost double the minimum wage. We are also a volunteer involving organisation. We deliver a range of services. We have 6 volunteer board members, plus myself as an executive officer, a small handful of paid staff, around about 33 FTE, and about 180 volunteers that support us to deliver those services that we need. And they're in the space of aged care, CHSP transport, Queensland Government transport, NDIS services, federal sports services, and fee for service. You can see our values up there, and probably the one that I hope resonates most today is not only being impactful, but trying to be fearless. We exist to rise to the challenge of the last mile. And the last mile is a term which comes out of eventing. The idea that you help patrons connect with their destination, might be their seat, might be able to help them to get to amenities when they go to a large event. It's not for me to preach back to the audience about the importance of volunteering. We've heard over the last couple of days the health, physical, psychological benefits of volunteering. But the challenge of the last mile can actually stop a number of businesses from wanting to step into this space. It's often the most costly part of a person's journey. And in our world, we take it out of the idea of events to services like the one you see on the screen. The physical act of rolling out mats, volunteers rolling out mats and helping people with a disability get across the soft sand to be able to participate and enjoy one of the great wonders of the Gold Coast, which is our beach. But it's a metaphor for our other services, people who are lonely and isolated, staying at home, And rather than us delivering food to them to solve a problem, we're interested in covering that last mile so that people remain active and connected to community. It's absolutely vital. And it's quite possible for us to actually design this out using those human-centered design principles that have also informed the development of the strategy. So in terms of governance and innovation, as I said, we're in our 25th year of volunteer governance. One of the big changes we've made is shifting our mindset from being a charity mindset to a profit for purpose mindset, being much more commercial in our acumen, thinking about generating a surplus to make sure that we remain viable. We're often planning for succession. They're really interesting and vibrant discussions in our organisation, and it shows the depth of the trust and respect that we have for each other as board members. And that's really important. It's quite a safe aspect for the organisation to know that we can have those frank discussions. It's certainly not a yes club. I have to say that I've got 2 board members sitting in the audience with me. Risk management, risk mitigation, insurance are also part of what we're involved in and taking responsibility for. But a lot of the key aspects now are around how we're working with our stakeholders to make sure that they understand who we are, the purpose that we can achieve for the community. And that involves us then thinking about recalibrating our compass. So where does that 2.5% of funding go? What's the impact that can it have? We've gone on a journey over 25 years from having structure as a committee, a management committee, through to a board, and now very much a skills-based board. And that journey's exciting. For us, innovation is not optional. We find ourselves very much in what are thinning markets, and by that I mean volunteer support services, the VRC funding. The announcement yesterday is awesome, but it's 50% of the funding that we used to get. And we're cognizant of the idea that policy might be trying to drive out who are players. And this will be something that you and your organisations will be always thinking about. The difficulty for us, though, is we find ourselves in a data fog. So we can't necessarily determine how effective the current settings are for policy, whether those decisions are going well. And in terms of what the previous speaker spoke about on the panel, it's hard to go and have a conversation with your politicians if there's no other evidence that's being presented out there, right? You are in a whiteout. We're adamant that we want to deliver what it is that volunteers want, and that's seen us make some really strategic investments to change the sort of platforms that we're using to bring volunteers into the organisation. We see ourselves as being early adopters in that space to ensure that there is a change. We're not afraid of risk. We've certainly rolled up our sleeves to do that, but we're also trying to make sure that in the events that we're doing that we're honouring the IP that we have. So I'd leave everyone with a final question, which is, it's important that everyone understands the market that you exist. You know, in a year from now, in 2 years from now, in 5 years from now, can your team deliver what your VIO's purpose is, what your service contracts may be? And in terms of that, can your board also go on that journey? Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. There's lots of food for thought there, and I'm sure that will generate many questions. Our last panelist today that I'd like to introduce is Julia Huang. So Julia is a second-year PhD candidate at the Tasmanian School of Business and Economics at the U of T. Her research explores how to sustain volunteer board members' engagement in community service organisations in Australia. So the National Strategy for Volunteering identified research gaps, and one of the research gaps they had was about this very issue about attracting and retaining volunteer board members, what facilitates their engagement, and by the same token, what actually are some of the inhibitors to their participation. So very timely, and thank you, Julia, for starting to fill that research gap. And please join me in welcoming Julia to the stage.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Huang, a PhD candidate at the University of Tasmania. And I would like to thank Brad for his great question for our audience. So I know we have so many volunteer board members today in our session. So really happy to see that. And my research explores how to sustain volunteer board member engagements in community service organizations in regional Australia. We all know that volunteer board members play an essential leadership role in ensuring effective governance in many volunteer-involving organizations in our Australia. And it might not be so easy for many community service organizations to attract, recruit, and retain well-qualified volunteer board members, especially for those community service organizations located in regional Australia. And according to the literature about volunteer engagement in the volunteering sector, volunteer engagement is associated with volunteer satisfaction, happiness, commitment, retention, and performance in organizations. Moreover, engaged volunteer board members can help to promote their organizations to other prospective volunteer board members and assist with the recruitment efforts. Sustaining volunteer board member engagement could be a good avenue for improving community service organizations' ability to create desirable volunteering experiences, recruit and retain well-qualified volunteer board members, as well as enhancing their board performance and ultimately improve their organizational performance. My research explores several aspects as shown in this slide. What is the volunteer board members' understanding of the concept of engagement? And what makes them feel more or less engaged in their volunteer board roles? What are some practical strategies to sustain volunteer board member engagement? How does the leadership look on their volunteer board? How does the leadership on their board influence their engagement level? Currently, I completed an online survey data collection for my research with my supervisors, and under the help with our volunteering Tasmania and our Tasmania Council of Social Service and many local community service organizations in regional Australia. So 75 individual volunteer board members come from different community service organizations in regional Australia filled in my survey. According to our survey results, for example, there are some factors that influence volunteer board members' engagement. In terms of this research question, what makes volunteer board members feel more or less engaged in their volunteer board roles? Firstly, good communication and collaboration with CEO management and board chair, collaboration among the board, and good board leadership. Feeling alignment between volunteer board members' personal values and the values and purpose of the organization, and issues about clarity, including clarity of board roles, board tasks, decision-making process, and clear expectation for volunteer board members. And clear divisions between board issues and operational matters, governance procedures and board meeting arrangements, reaching goals and feedback, and they would like to see the contribution they make to their beneficiaries, their organizations, and their communities. Reaching meaningful and successful activities and projects initiated by the board. And there are some individual level board members' perspective, like their personalities, experience, skill sets, and attitude of other volunteer board members, and personal drive, and time commitment and workload, ethics and corruption, complex governance, regulation, compliance, and risks. And apart from our online survey, we will conduct our individual interviews with some of these volunteer board members very soon to investigate the underlying reasons for their different engagement levels. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Very timely. We'll now take questions from the floor. So could I ask if you're interested in asking a question, if you could raise your hand, excuse me, state your name and your organisation, and if you could wait for the microphone so that everyone can hear you. Any questions from the floor? Got one question here. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Just one here. And would you mind standing? Thank you.
I don't get much taller. My name's Rachel. I'm from Meals on Wheels, Queensland. We are the peak body for Meals on Wheels services in Queensland and support 117 member services. My question to the panel is, how do you, and I call them placeholders, how do you replace the placeholders on your boards with skilled board members? For those ones that have been there forever, you can't chuck them out.
Thank you. Brad, would you like to have a go at that one? Not that I'm pointing fingers at anything.
I'll have a go. Look, it's probably a really quintessential question for organisations in terms of what that replacement pathway looks like. And I think in many ways it's about having a really deliberate conversation within your board and within the community around what succession looks like. So the key thing is you don't want it to be a surprise. That's the first part. There's some checks and balances, making sure that your constitution's got some really good views around what replacement, retirement by rotation looks like for participants. Some boards will go to maximum terms so that it's actually quite foreseeable and plannable. At our board, we've talked about discussions around using other avenues like not only extending the numbers of people on our board, so our constitution allows for up to 15 members and we're a 7-member board at the moment, so there's plenty of room. But it's the idea of where things like subcommittees might fit or other opportunities of engagement to be able to get either board members or other skilled volunteers to come and engage with your board in a way which may not have the same gravity of being a board member. I think that's a really great piece. And the final piece I'd offer would be how your board networks with other parts of the community. So if you're involved in Queensland, the advisory board sort of events, the AICD type events, chambers of commerce that run in your local area, there's lots of talent. Now, depending on where you are, and the Gold Coast is a really interesting place. So everyone wanted to move to the Gold Coast as soon as the border was open. And with that comes like an influx of talent, of people who are potentially highly skilled. And one of the challenges you have to overcome is how do they get to know who you are so that you might be on their radar.
Hey, Brad, thank you. One of the things that we find in that space is increasingly in for-profit boards, and there's a lot that we can learn from that sector, is they use things like skills and diversity assessments built into their performance frameworks, as well as board reflections on how the board is going, taken from the whole board, and that can help to generate discussions at a board level, sort of on a periodic basis. That can be very helpful. Next question in the room.
Hello. Hi, I'm Bridget from Volunteering Tasmania. I have a, I guess, I don't know whether you have an answer or not, but it's an interesting question, I guess, that I've heard around traps. So lots of our community organisations are quite small, majority volunteer run with volunteer boards. Potentially you've got 7 board members with 2 permanent staff and the rest are all volunteers. Succession planning is an issue, fears around compliance, governance, strategy, legalities, all of that sort of stuff is precious, and particularly in rural remote communities, we don't necessarily have the influx or the change in community and interested volunteers. So while I'm always supportive of more people being on boards and being part of that process, I'm interested to know if you have come across another governance model that allows our smaller organisations to have not necessarily it be a burden on just them, but a collective governance model that could help multiple small organisations or grassroots groups. That word just left my brain. Yeah, I just wondered if there was another governance model that might be a bit more flexible and agile for those smaller groups without them having to remain compliant with your treasurer, your president, your secretaries. And being able to have, I don't know, like a broader group, or whether we've come across another model.
So I think we're talking there about informal volunteering. Julia, would you like to talk to that?
That's a very good question, I feel, and there are different kinds of community service organizations. You know, they might come from small, like grassroots community service organizations, or small to medium-sized community service organizations, and other might be large community service organizations. And according to a report for our Tasmania state reporting, 72% of our volunteer involving organizations are those small to medium-sized community service organizations, and they may have no paid staff at all, or they just have 0.5 to 5 staff in their organization, paid staff. So their volunteer board members need to may take more responsibilities and roles, both ensuring effective governance, dealing with governance issues, as well as some operational matters and operational issues. And there might be some challenges for these grassroots organizations and small to medium-sized community organizations, because it might be hard for them to do the fundraising activity. They may have very limited resources like human resources to recruit and find the proper volunteer board members for them. So I think for these community organizations in small to medium-sized or grassroots organizations, the traditional governance model might not be so appropriate for them, and they may have their different characteristics, their own condition, and apply the specialized or customized governance model for them to develop better and attract and retain well-qualified volunteer board members. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, we've got one at the front here.
Hi there. Thanks for interesting conversation today. Ash Rosshandler, CEO of Good Company. Bit of a controversial question. In the US, they look at their board members, and if you're a board member in the US, they either say you've got to give, get, or get off. So either got to write them a fat check, you've got to find a friend to write a fat check, or you just got to leave the board. So that pretty much doesn't happen in Australia. So my question is, are we too soft on board members? Do we ask enough of them? And just what your thoughts are on that.
Anyone like to have a crack at that?
I'll go. I think it's profoundly a cultural difference between the two countries. My observations would be for smaller not-for-profits. People are coming with the idea of, can we cover off the governance aspect and keep the organisation going as being the first and foremost. In our organisation, when we're looking to recruit, we're certainly having conversations around what would be the attributes that one candidate versus another might bring to the organisation. That might include skills around fundraising, connections, donors, bequests. But I don't see it as really being the expectation that we would lean into board members for that give, maybe some of the get in that sort of space. And I think what probably goes with that, Ash, is the idea that it then becomes the domain of more wealthier individuals to be in that space around boards. And I think for many of the organisations that we represent here, that's probably going to be fairly unpalatable. It's that idea of who are we representing, that participation on the board, like volunteering, is an opportunity around equality, and we would hope that it's within the reach of most individuals. But every organisation here, I'm sure, would be going, if I can get a board member who's got connections and deep pockets, and sometimes the give comes through the connections, through their networks, through the doors that might open, and that's quite powerful, and I'm sure welcomed by everyone. I wonder though whether it's going to shift towards that direction over time, right? And I would probably expect that it'll filter down through the larger not-for-profits as it comes through. And one of the risks is if smaller not-for-profits, if smaller charities fail to get the directors and board members that they need, you'll see some consolidation of players in the sector, and that might open up those chances.
I suppose I can only answer that from my point of view as well, but from an insurance point of view as well, there's a reason why Australian insurance policies don't extend to the US and Canada. It's because they're just such a more litigious society. The risk of claims over there are massive. So we're looking at shifting our culture to become more harder on directors, more harder on not-for-profits. The question sort of has to be asked is, what will the response be from that as well? So Brad raises a lot of good points there as well in regards to, are we just opening ourselves up to the more wealthier people in society to, be on the boards of not-for-profits? Then we have to look at, well, what does that mean in terms of the Equal Opportunities Act as well? Are we actually restricting people the opportunity to come onto a board? And are we actually, discriminating that potentially as well? So I think we also have to look at the flow and effects of that as well. if the entire culture shifts, then the entire culture shifts and becomes a lot more normal, but if 1 or 2 organisations are doing it, it can open doors for a few issues potentially as well.
Just sort of bouncing off your point there about equality and inclusion on boards, I think a really important issue is women's representation on boards. You know, systemically, women really represent a really high number of volunteer managers and volunteers, but those numbers aren't really reflected on boards. I serve on 2 boards and I'm the only woman on both of those boards, and I think that's reflected across the board as well. How do you think we can approach this issue and encourage more diversity, not just for women, but for people with disability and for people who are culturally and linguistically diverse, and just diversity in general? How do you think we can encourage that in these spaces and in these leadership and strategic positions, and encourage inclusion in those spaces?
Julia, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. Actually, in nonprofit governance research, we encourage our volunteer board to increase their board diversity, like increase the percentage of female on the board, increase the percentage of different age groups, and they may come from different backgrounds. And we have skills-based volunteer boards and representative volunteer boards. So those kind of representative volunteer boards can represent their different kinds of voices, ideas from their group, and because we all know that an important volunteer board member roles is to ensure the good strategic plan. So it might be very important for them to make appropriate and good strategic decisions for their organization. So if we can have a more diversity on our volunteer board, we can hear different kinds of voices and ideas from no matter our female, male, and different like backgrounds and representative groups. So I think it's really important, and our research proved that if we increase the diversity on our board performance will be increased too, and ultimately influence our organizational performance, which is a very desirable outcome for us to see. Thank you.
I guess one question that raises for me is, I think that's a really good point. It'd be lovely to see a quota for just volunteer managers. It would probably take care of everything. But you think, and one of the questions I have for the board, for the panel is, what is the connection between the board and the volunteering strategy of the organisation? So recognising that they're volunteer involving organisations and volunteering as essential, how do boards engage with the strategy for volunteers in their organisations?
I'll kick it off. I guess our strategy is entirely centred around volunteering. In fact, the last review of the strategic plan swung back probably from a broader focus around services to talk about volunteering, igniting the pathway for impact in those spaces. We have, whilst as a volunteer resource centre, we might be one of the larger organisations in the country. There's high points of contact that are going on between the volunteer stories and the volunteer experiences that are happening between our organisation and our board. If you look at any of some of the social media posts, for example, you'll find the two directors in here. They're probably identifiable with the white shirts in any case, but you'll see them volunteering alongside the team to do some fundraising activity and wrap presents at Christmas time. About 600 presents a day we wrapped, right? So we're often taking the journey of the board of trying to get people into the trenches to be alongside volunteers. When we had involvement in the Lismore floods, we're very fortunate as a community transport organisation to have around about 35 vehicles. With the floods, we mobilised about 500 volunteers for over 9 weeks to go down and do mud out activities. And there were ample opportunities for engagement between the board and that group. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is out of that activity, we recruited a director. Right? So, volunteering is the melting pot. I tell the story of people of who's on the bus. I have a series of photos of people getting ready to go down to Lismore and say who's on the bus. And it's, it's the myotherapist, it's the psychologist, it's the school teacher. And in this instance, it turned out to be the human resources and strategy manager for one of the biggest international companies in the Asia Pacific. So you can't miss those opportunities, I think, in terms of inviting board, but it's also that connection when potential board members see other potential candidates engaging with the business. That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's a great way for board members to remember why they're there, why they're giving up their Tuesday nights, or what it is on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'll just make one other point, which is, there's a big difference too between general volunteering and the risk profile that a board member holds. So, it's not going to be the appetite for everyone. And I think to your point around, where we sit with diversity, how we get people to come through, there's an obligation for all organisations to be making sure that we are investing in and blooding people in this idea of being directors, of having those governance skills. And I'd be cautious that whilst it might be idealistic for every volunteer manager to have that voice and access and have influence, I think that's important, but that doesn't equate to governance skills.
Yeah. Just on that, Derek, do you have any comments from a director's liability insurance in terms of what's expected of directors?
Potentially yes and no. I mean, as we know, there's no sort of formal qualifications that are required to be a director, particularly a volunteer director as well. So I suppose that is more so the benefit of making sure that you are finding people who are appropriately trained for the role that you want them to do. We don't want to try and restrict them from doing a role that's different to what they do regularly or what skills they have, because that's where their interest lies. But it is very important to try and line up those skills with, the positions that are available in your organisation, because that will reduce the risk of, errors occurring, incidents occurring. At the end of the day, the directors and officers insurance policy or management liability policy is there to respond to those incidents. But again, that comes back to formal risk management of just what are you doing to minimise the risk of a claim. And if that is aligning someone's skills up with the most appropriate position available for them in the organisation, then so be it.
Got a question here. Thank you.
Oh, hello. I'm Leanne. I'm the CEO of Easy Care Gardening. Actually, thank you, Derek, for all the help that you've given us over the years. So I'm just sort of sharing a comment rather than a question. So given COVID, we've learnt that boards can go online, and I was asked to stay on a board that turned into a regional area. And even though I'd love to be face-to-face, they wanted to retain me. So it moved online for me, and I've been able to continue to participate, and hopefully I can go face to face sometimes. So thank you.
So it actually increased your ability to participate in that regard. Yeah, thank you. We had another question here. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lucy from Volunteering SA and NT, and it was really just an observation or something, continuation for what you were saying about having the diversity in our boards. When I hear time and time again in our regions that you've got these really small sports clubs and these community groups who are always stuck in their ways, we've always done it like this, and it's how do you take them through that change management, and any tips that I can share the love across our regions would be appreciated. Good luck.
Julia's research touched on regional specifically.
Thank you very much for your question. So one of the suggestions from our research might be like think about maybe younger generation. They may bring their diverse kinds of ideas and thoughts into our board and might keep, help to move our board on a like innovative way to grow better. And there might be some approaches for our volunteer involving organizations to attract this, like younger generation and young volunteer board members. For example, some of the students in local universities and college, they are major at corporate governance, law, finance, accounting, and so on. They might be very willing to transfer what they have learned in their university or college into practice, and they would like to be on a volunteer board and make contribution. So I feel, yeah, that could be a point for us to think about our younger generation and have the different kinds of age group in our board. Thank you.
I think just briefly on that as well, I had to say, I think there was a little bit of a silver lining to COVID as well, because it changed how we actually operate and opened up so many doors. Leanne's still on the board for a committee that she wouldn't actually be on board of because they've moved everything to a virtual environment essentially. Me, myself personally, I'm on the board for a local sports club as well, and a small community, country community where they have been stuck in their ways, and COVID was almost a blessing because we actually revamped our entire structure of how we actually operate. And the question there is, why do we have to go back to what we were doing before? If we've changed our strategy for the better and we've found new ways to actually operate, why can't we continue with that as well? So I think it's actually acknowledging that there was a silver lining from that. Fortunately, I have to tie it back to insurance for you guys, but as things change, insurance has changed with it as well. So if you are operating differently, make sure you do speak with your brokers so you are covered for what you are doing now. But personally, I don't see why we have to go back if something's working now better than what it was before.
I think there's a couple of real pragmatic things you can do with clubs. One is a really great exercise, which is to get people to self-assess against the AICD standards for not-for-profit organisations, and making sure that directors, board members have certainly got current PDs, something that they're expected to sign and perform against. Those things are quite valuable. And the other great tip I would say is, there are often organisations that have been extremely successful. We've got boards that might have gone on a very, very difficult and challenging journey at times, but people seem to be quite generous in terms of wanting to share that knowledge. So being able to reach out and finding a peer or a mentor organisation or a coach in that space is important. And the other thing is not to shy away from the conversation about that sporting club saying, yes, we want to have on-field success, but there is no organisation unless we have a plan for how we're going to grow those roles out. Right? One of the biggest traps I've seen from my nursing days was, you might be really great as a clinician, but you're not great as a manager. And it might be the same in the sporting field. You might be able to bat 100 every week, but unless you've got the skill set that goes with it and the competence that goes with it, you may actually be putting a risk to the organisation that you're trying to support.
Oh, we've got a question here first, and then we'll come over.
I can't actually believe I'm actually going to talk about insurance because no one else really is, but you've done a great job, Derek, of making it palatable. And I got really excited in January when I got an email back from our really excellent risk and governance person at the Heart Foundation. And we were really concerned because we had about 10 volunteers that were heading for their 90s, where we're going to have to say, unfortunately, our insurance doesn't cover you anymore. But I got this really exciting email with insurance in the subject line, which, again, have I ever said that in my life? No. And we founded insurance. I don't know who. That does actually extend. So I was just wondering if that was something that you consider these days as people are getting older and they want to be more active into their older ages, and for everyone just to be aware of that, that. And for younger people too. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. Yeah, this is actually the most common question we get in terms of insurance. Look at the demographic of volunteers. It's usually people who are retired, who have so much time on their hands that they want to still help out in the community. It's not, I'm sorry, I apologize. It is a large component of the volunteer force though. And yeah, the last thing you want is, for your volunteers person accident policy, there's usually age restrictions of 18 to 65, and sometimes you can't get them higher. They're not the only policies out there, and it is just simple as shopping around to see what else is available. I know personally our policies, we have no age limits at all. The instruction is as long as they can work independently and take direction. So if they're 65 years old, but unfortunately they've got Alzheimer's, similar to my dad, he can't take direction. So he can't be a covered volunteer. Absolutely, yes. And that's the other side of the thing where the NDIS can actually come into it as well, and the service provider, if they're there to assist them, absolutely. But if you've got a 95-year-old who's cognizant, who's ready to work, why can't they be covered? There should be no limitation on that. So yes, absolutely, it is important to shop around for insurances because, as I mentioned before, your insurance can actually limit your activities in how you service the community. And you don't want to shut that door off if there is potential out there for it as well. And that's how you can entice new volunteers to come in, even the younger generation where they might be 15 but they won't get involved. Why can't we cover them? Or if we want to retain volunteers over 90 years old that want to stick around, why can't we cover them as well? So there are definitely options available. There's no insurance product that is just, this is it, this is what you have to take. Shop around, see what else is out there.
Really good advice there. Don't delete emails just because they have insurance in the subject line. Apparently, read the fine print because there could be exclusions that you're not aware of. And the other one is shop around because not every policy is the same and different brokers and different insurance companies offer different levels of coverage. So think about what you want to do as an organisation, what your objectives are, what your goals are, how you want to operate, and then see what is the product that could best fit that for you. That's also affordable, presumably. So. Any other question? I think we had a question here. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Ange from YMCA in Victoria. I'm interested in your thoughts around governance as relates to strategic development for organisations. And I guess my thinking is as we're getting more sophisticated in how we build our boards and we're bringing in skilled volunteers specifically for that purpose, we're shifting further away from that historical board building of people that have participated in our orgs and come up through our programs. So I guess I'm just interested in your advice or thoughts around how we manage the tension point between strategies that are being developed by sometimes a slightly removed board of volunteers and the needs of the operational teams on the ground.
Great question.
I think the way the strategy comes together is all about process. So there's opportunities for boards to receive information and input in terms of their strategic plan, which comes from that grassroots service delivery front end. And I think the most important thing is that voice is actually evident in the strategy. And I think then, as you mentioned, there's a range of other kind of steps that could be taking place to get that representation. In my experience, it's not uncommon to see people who've been service recipients come through a journey. And there are some pushes from places like the NDIS to make sure that there is good representation, that the voice of service users is being heard and influenced by the board. But that won't always equate through to, I think, a position on the board. So I would always start from the piece of, from a skills-based board, what's the competence that we need to see in the person? How does that reflect across the team? So where the collective knowledge is and the skill set. And then the other part is to make sure that people are identifying the gaps and either getting other people to donate those skills in, like a volunteer consultancy, or that your organisation holds a budget for buying in that gap so that your board is not without that knowledge. The key piece is to make sure that all the requirements that the board needs to fulfil and make that policy work well are being actioned, both in terms of knowledge and input from the customer. So I think there will actually be more boards who will look for a formal structure for that representation, and it's a smaller number of service users who may have that board knowledge skill set, but they could be developed. That's a funnel of potential board directors that can be built up.
I think one of the interesting things there also is about the role of the executive directors. So they're people that are working in the organisation who may participate in the board. Now, not every board needs to have that role. So you can have a board that's completely made up of independent directors. But it goes to the culture of the organisation. And is there a culture in that organisation where people can express how they're finding the strategy and how that's working for them on the ground? And also, how do they get agency of that discussion into the board, either through an executive director role or through typically the CEO? So I think it also goes to thinking about the culture, how people can speak up and how you can actually have that conversation, which ultimately is going to benefit everyone anyway. So, and scale plays a big part. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that comment was about the scale of the organisation. The larger the organisation, the more difficult it can be to actually facilitate those direct conversations. We have a question at the front, but have you got one there? And then we'll come to you. Thank you.
Hi, Mel from Delta Therapy Dogs. I also have an insurance question, Derek. Do you have any common blind spots that us as non-profits perhaps think we're covered for and then find out we aren't commonly coming through, that perhaps we should check too?
Love you also. Like I said, the most common one is the age of the volunteers that you actually have as well. But it should come down to what you actually declare into the broker as well. So the exclusions and policies, they're very common and consistent across different brokers. It's really where we find claims may actually be declined is whether or not they were actually declared appropriately and whether or not they were actually facilitated back to the insurers appropriately. When you sort of put your proposal in for an insurance policy, you don't just mention your main activities that you do and then make the assumption that everything else filters from that. You have to make sure you're actually mentioning everything specifically. Because if it's not specifically mentioned, the insurers do actually have a right to turn around and say, well, we didn't know you were doing this specific activity, so we can't cover you. So whilst there are general exclusions and policies that a lot of people miss, cyber is now a general exclusion unless you have a specific cyber liability policy. More so claims get declined because of information not appropriately being provided at the start of the policy being set up.
Thank you. That's a really good question. And did you say that there's a general exclusion for cybersecurity risk in general?
It's getting a lot more common. So there used to be cyber extensions under your directors and officers policies or your professional indemnity policies. They're now being removed. Cybercrime is the fastest growing crime in the world in the last 7 years. It's absolutely astronomical and it's scary. You're more likely to get hacked than you are for a brick to get thrown through your glass window. It's the long and short of it, and it can be more crippling to your organisation. That's why that extension has been removed, because that's not the design of that policy of a professional indemnity or directors and officers policy. It's just always been an add-on to, essentially sales. Would you like fries for that? But that's why they've added that to, or they've removed that extension away. They made a complete exclusion, and that's where you need your cyber liability policy to cover for those instances.
Yeah, have a look at those risk management plans. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Derek, another one for you, because insurance is just so endlessly fascinating.
Love you also.
We've talked a lot about shopping around and looking for the best deals and so forth, but the truth of the matter is that there are some organisations, government, semi-government, statutory bodies and so forth who are constricted by the insurance that they can have. And whilst I acknowledge that the insurance field is competitive like all the others, I was wondering if there's any sort of industry-wide forum where you get together and perhaps look at some of the issues that face volunteering and not-for-profits, and guys like you are able to give advice on, can I put it delicately, some organisations which may not be so attuned to the requirements of volunteers and volunteering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you raise a good point there in that there are a lot of organisations and businesses out there who aren't attuned to not-for-profits. A lot of the times you will fall into a business insurance policy because that's the next closest thing available for you, and the broker or the insurer you're dealing with just doesn't understand what's going on. In terms of, is there a wider insurance forum for not-for-profits and volunteers? Unfortunately not. It is a considered. I'll try my best. But no, I mean, like I said, we are the only not-for-profit broker in Australia. It's a very sort of minor field in the insurance industry. And that's where you do sort of fall into that business insurance, sector. So no, there isn't a general forum, which is why we make an effort to come out to forums like this. With Volunteering Australia, we partner with, state bodies, peak bodies all across the country, and we come out and we do education pieces like this because it is the most effective way to educate people. But unfortunately, there is no overarching standard or forum for insurance.
We have time for one last quick question at the front.
Sorry, mine will be a quick one, so maybe a second. Derek, you're going to feel heaps of love. Jonathan from Rosie's Friends on the Street in Queensland. With the shift in volunteer trends from lifers to spontaneous one-off, when is a volunteer considered a volunteer for insurance? Is it when they fill out paperwork, when they put on a uniform, or when either managers say you're a volunteer?
Beautiful. Love you, Jonathan. Thank you. It's when they start doing activities on behalf of the organisation. So if they've filled out paperwork, but they haven't actually done anything for you, then, they haven't done any activities, they wouldn't be covered. Essentially, if they sign the paperwork, then walk out of the office and they fall over, or they're not actually doing an activity on behalf of the organisation at that point. the point where they're covered is if they've taken direction from someone at the organisation, could be a supervisor or a lead volunteer, whatever that may be, and then they start doing work activities on behalf of the organisation, that's when they're covered. That can also extend to, I know for our policy at least, direct travel to and from their home to the place that they're doing the activity. They're travelling there on behalf of the organisation to do an activity. So if they get in a car accident, they can actually be covered in that point as well. But it's really important to note that it's when they're doing the activity. One that we struggled a lot with during COVID was virtual volunteering. So assisting people in the comfort of your own home. It's very difficult to say I was injured doing work at my own home when they could have actually been making themselves a cup of coffee. It's very hard to monitor that, and the way around it was people have a sign in, sign out database where they'll click to say when they're actually working, click off when they're having a break, and that would be used as some sort of evidence that they got injured at that time. We had someone fall over when they were hanging the washing out, but unfortunately there's no way to prove that they're actually volunteering at the time they're doing their own personal task. So it's really distinguishing when they've taken some form of direction and they're doing activities on behalf of the organisation.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent final question.
Yeah, and there was another one there.
I think we're out of time.
Sorry. Does there need to be paperwork? No, there doesn't. Paperwork is good for risk management and to keep track of your volunteers. But if they're a one-off volunteer, they've shown up and they're taking direction and they're doing volunteering, they're a volunteer.
Thank you. So that concludes our formal sessions. I would just like, before we go, to thank Gemma, who has been our room manager extraordinaire, who's done a fantastic job today. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you so much. And if there were elephant stamps for panel members, I would give 3 out to this lot, because how good were they? There was so much love in the room. So my thanks to Julia Huang, Derek Turner and the other Bradley Cooper for their presentation today. Thanks everyone, time for lunch.